with everything you've done in your career and as over as you've been, do you feel like there was a missed opportunity at some point to be a world champion somewhere?
Absolutely.
Was there a specific time?
Well, I was told, I don't know this for an absolute fact because I wasn't in on the meeting, but I was told by some people that were that, as a matter of fact, one of the writers, that there was talk about MVP being world heavyweight champion, but there was reservations because of my felony conviction. So for those of your viewers that don't know, when I was a teenager, I was coming up in Miami, rough gang violence. I was an armed robber, and I did a robbery, and I ended up going to prison for several years.
9.5 to be specific.
9.5 years I served, from 16 to 26.
Sentenced to 18.5 years.
18.5 with a mandatory 3 for the sawed-off shotgun, meaning for 3 years you can't get time off for good behavior. And consequently, it was as a result of that, when I was at work release getting out of prison, I met a correctional officer, primetime Daryl D., and he was an indie worker. And that's how I got into the business, because he would bring in videotapes for us to watch in the morning before they would open up the center to let us go to work. So guys would have, couldn't leave till 7. So it'd be like 10, 15 minutes, people just kind of milling around, and he'd bring in tapes, and I would be, hey man, how do you guys do that without really killing each other? And he was like, well, I see you out there playing basketball, working out, you got a good physique, you're athletic. When you get out, if you want to give it a try, let's, come on, I'll show you something. So that's how I broke into wrestling. But going back to my conviction, it was at, work release that I met the correctional officer who introduced me to my career. But now I'm a convicted felon.
So they didn't want to make you the world heavyweight champion?
Because there were potentially countries that I couldn't get into. So how can you be the world heavyweight champion, but you can't go to this country?
Wow.
Like going to Japan. Japan is very strict about people who, like James Brown, they wouldn't let into Japan. But because I went over for a Japanese company, they were able to smooth it over with the visa process. Canada, I couldn't get into Canada for a long time. I had to go through a process there where people had to write letters of recommendation, and I had to, a whole bunch. It cost thousands of dollars in legal fees to get something in Canada they call a letter of rehabilitation. They said, okay, you're rehabilitated, you can come to Canada. You always have to bring this letter with you, because if they ask, have you been convicted of a felony? And I say, yes, but here's my letter of rehabilitation. Then I can get in. Australia. The last time I went to Australia was with Tommy Dreamer's House of Hardcore. It literally took an act of Congress. at the 12th hour, some parliament official, nobody wanted to sign off on my document to let me in. And somebody knew somebody some member of parliament or whatever, signed off on it, and I was able to get in Australia. And now England, the United Kingdom, just started the electronic transfer authorization. And they asked the question, have you been convicted of a felony that required you to have a 12-month stay or longer in a correction? Well, yeah, I did 9.5 years. So I answered truthfully. And that's why I wasn't allowed in for Forbidden Door. So the coming full circle, as it was told to me, there was a conversation about me being a world champion, but there were reservations because of my convicted felon status.
You gave a TED Talk about this that is so powerful. And it comes back around to the idea of, when is a felon not a felon anymore?
When do I stop paying?
You've paid your debt to society, but have you really?
Well, we have this contract with our society that says if you commit a crime, you get caught, you get convicted, you go to prison, and you pay your debt to society.
Yeah.
And when you get out, your debt is supposed to be paid. But there's that box. Have you been convicted of a felony?
So they can discriminate against you.
Yeah, legal discrimination. And in some cases, I understand that. If you're a pedophile, then no, you should never be able to work, at an elementary school. Of course not.
Yeah.
And I understand people having reservations. Hey, you were once an armed robber. Do I want you working in my jewelry store? I get it. But if, when I got out of prison, I remember trying to get an apartment, and there was a background check. So you do your time, you get out of prison, and you can't rent an apartment, you can't get a job. But I thought I paid my debt to society. Now there's no place for me to live, no place for me to work. What am I supposed to do? And there's a part of me that believes very strongly that that's on purpose to maintain the recidivism, because the correctional the for-profit prison system and the correctional systems in most states generate a lot of money. So
But you're still paying for the sins of when you were 16.
a bad decision, and I always make this distinction. People go, "Oh, you were a kid, you made a mistake." No, I didn't make a mistake. I made a conscious choice to commit it. I planned out an armed robbery, but I made a bad choice. And at 16, most of us weren't making the best choices at 16. But I went to prison. I paid my debt to society. And then when I came home, I had to prove again, hey, look, I'm trustworthy. Look, I'm not going to rob your store if you give me a job here. But all these years later, I still can't vote. I can't vote in the state of Florida. They passed an amendment so that you can vote in the state of Florida. But I live in Texas. So that doesn't exist in Texas yet. So I can't own a firearm. I can't vote. But I still pay substantial taxes. So it's weird how that works. But yeah, that's when do we stop paying?
Do you still remember your inmate number?
You'll never forget it. Yeah, yeah.
What is it?
190197.
Florida State of Corrections or Department of Corrections?
Yeah, number 190197. You never forget it. Like if you've been to the military, you never forget your military ID number or whatever.